In this video, I'd like to talk about butcher's nails. And it's basically impossible to talk about butcher's nails and not talk about the Lord of the Red Sands, Angron, and his journey from a slave to a Daemon Prince. Long ago, when the Primarchs were scattered to the winds by the ruinous powers, by a warp vortex, Angron landed on the world of Nuceria, and was immediately beset upon by Eldar. Broken and battered, but victorious, he would be captured and sold into slavery. Elites of Nuceria had gladiatorial games and other forms of entertainment, and Angron's first experience with this would be thrown into an acid pit, in the center of which was a ziggurat, a large pyramid-like structure. Hundreds of slaves were also present in this pit. At the top, there was only room for one. These slavers ended up pouring huge amounts of acid into this pit, causing each of the slaves to climb it, and as room lessened, fight amongst themselves to be the final survivor. Angron was the final survivor, defeating every other slave, and emerged victorious once again. Seeing his abilities, they decided to make him one of the official gladiators, and actually named him Angron Thalkir, or Child of the Mountain. Even though he was still a young child or even teen, his martial prowess and skill was greater than many of the others, and this only proceeded as he aged. But he also had a sense of honor that led his actions from then on, until the nails were installed. During these fights, as a gladiator, he would spare those who fought with honor and bravery. He earned amazing amounts of respect during these battles amongst the other gladiators, and would end up becoming the de facto leader. These years that he spent in the gladiatorial pits would not be happy years, but perhaps the most satisfying, because of the brotherhood that he developed with these gladiators. Amongst these gladiators was a man named Oenomaus, who would act as a father figure to Angron, since the Emperor had not yet found him. Oenomaus and Angron forged a bond that could not be broken. In one fight with cybernetically enhanced Ogryn, Oenomaus and Angron would defeat them spectacularly. The leaders of Nuceria knew that this was something that they could exploit, and ordered Angron and Oenomaus to fight in a 1v1 with no survivor. Angron refused and insulted these leaders, and as punishment, they would install the butcher's nails upon him. The butcher's nails were dreadlock-shaped things that would be implanted in his head, destroy his brain, and increase adrenaline and aggression tremendously. And in a fit of rage after the nails were installed, he would kill Oenomaus. He would never forgive himself nor these slavers for what occurred, and would swear revenge against the slavers, that he would come and destroy them. After this, he would work with the other gladiators, training them, increasing their prowess, all the while attempting escape after escape after escape, which would all fail, until finally he decided to include the other gladiators in this plan, and he would be successful, killing many of the leaders and other people who operated the gladiatorial games. He would escape to a mountain where he would spend years both fighting the enemy on their terms as well as his, but they would never succeed. The gladiators and Angron eventually named themselves the Eater of Cities for all the damage they would do on Nuceria. The Nucerian elite, after all this time, decided that it was too much for Angron to be out there and continue this damage, and they would send an even larger contingent of people that would end up being 7 armies in size. During all this time, the Emperor was observing Angron, but not interfering. But the Emperor knew that with 7 armies, that Angron would ultimately be defeated and be killed. The Emperor was not willing to do this. The Emperor came to Angron, explained to him what was going to happen, and that Angron needed to leave with the Emperor in order to save his life. He refused to take the gladiators. Angron refused to go with the Emperor. Ultimately, the Emperor teleported Angron away from the battle and onto his ship, where a contingent of custodies attempted to control him. Angron was able to kill one of these custodies before being subdued. He never forgave the Emperor for that, and harbored a long grudge against the Emperor that would ultimately lead to his downfall. It's not clear what transpired between the Emperor and Angron's acceptance of the leadership of his legion, the War Hounds. The Emperor also needed to know what was important about these butcher's nails, which were not initially part of the plan for Angron. After hours of being studied, they found that the butcher's nails could not be removed without damaging Angron's brain. They were also damaging his brain continuously and would eventually lead to Angron's death. This was made a secret of the highest priority. Angron was filled with rage during this time. Over months, multiple war hounds would plead with him in order to get him to act as their leader more directly, as opposed to just the acceptance that the Emperor was able to get upon him. At least 8 leaders of the War Hounds would attempt to confront him and get him to accept it. They would plead with him, including the de facto leader with Angron's refusal, Ibram Greer. Ibram Greer mysteriously disappeared, and it's assumed that Angron killed him, but it's been stricken from the record. Finally, a captain, an assault marine named Captain Kharn, would confront Angron and speak to him. Angron again responded with violence. Captain Kharn did not fight Angron, but instead would speak to him and remind him of the brotherhood that he had with the gladiators back on Nuceria. And within an inch of his life, Kharn continued to resist Angron's just beating the hell out of him, basically. Angron saw this worthiness and reminded himself of the brotherhood and his honor back in Nuceria. And before he killed Kharn, was convinced to take up the mantle. This was not a full acceptance. Many of the War Hounds not be able to survive certain things, and he felt they were weak. And Angron would ignore them repeatedly and give them impossible tasks. Nonetheless, Angron was now more involved with his legion, which he renamed the World Eaters. He said they would make new traditions, similar to the traditions of his gladiators back in Nuceria, whom he loved so much. In order to test his World Eaters, he would frequently give them nearly impossible tasks to see if they would measure up. One of the common ones was conquering a world, an entire world, in 31 hours, the length of a Nucerian day. The World Eaters were never able to destroy and conquer a world within this time. After multiple attempts, after the failure, Angron would order decimation. Decimation means that 1 in 10 World Eaters would be killed, and the killing would have to be done by the 9 World Eaters who survived. After multiple decimations, there was a Centurion named Mago who refused and attempted to subdue Angron in order to get him to stop ordering decimation, as well as destroy the butcher's nails. You see, Angron had decided that if he has the butcher's nails, and it improved his martial prowess so much, that every World Eater should have the butcher's nails. Angron had ordered Gahlan Surlak to develop and improve the butcher's nails so that they might be installed upon every World Eater. These tests had proved fatal to many, in fact all, of the World Eaters that had been tempted upon one way or another. Some died outright, while others would descend into madness and not be able to control themselves, and immediately start attacking their fellow World Eaters. Even more so than some of the other Butcher's Nails when Angron had lost, just decided to kill everything. Because of his treachery, Mago was killed. And in fact, he was killed by Kharn, who was formerly his friend. Gahlan Surlak continued his work, and in fact Kharn, the same captain that had convinced Angron to take up the mantle of leadership and killed Mago, would be the first World Eater to have these Butcher's Nails installed successfully. While they were very similar to Kharn's Butcher's Nails, these designs that were developed from the architect from Angron's nails would be shaped differently and not in fact destroy the mind in the same manner that Angron's Butcher's Nails would eventually have destroyed Angron's had not fate intervened. The Emperor knew of these Butcher's Nails being installed as well as the multiple decimation attempts, and sent one of his other favored sons, Leman Russ, to stop the surgeries. In a battle, Angron would ultimately defeat Leman Russ. However, Leman Russ was not blinded by rage and knew that that possibility existed, and told his space wolves to surround and control Angron. Angron was thus unable to kill Leman Russ outright. Leman Russ ordered a retreat, because ultimately killing Angron was not his goal, but instead to stop the surgeries. Blinded by this rage, he still felt that he had beaten Leman Russ, despite the tactical miscalculation. The Emperor would then send his favored son, Horus, which clearly would be a mistake, because Horus had already fallen to chaos at this point. He whispered a poison into his ear, telling him that the Emperor was weak and that the Primarchs should rise up against him. To Angron, this was confirmation of things that he was feeling all along, and added to the grudge and anger that he held against the Emperor for the loss of the gladiators way back in Nuceria. At long last, it was also time for Angron to return to Nuceria to kill his former captors. There would be a long fight, and he would ultimately kill everything on Nuceria. Lorgar was also present during this fight, and a ritual was performed that would transform Angron into the Daemon Prince we know him to be today, the Red Angel. Unlike other Daemon Princes, Angron would return every 8 months, 8 weeks, and 8 days later, once he was defeated. In the aftermath of the installation of the Butcher's Nails and Angron's ascension to demonhood, Kharn would ultimately become one of the other prominent figures in the World Eaters, especially when Angron was away. Kharn would recover Gorechild, which was one of Angron's twin axes, Gorechild and Gorefather, after a battle, and get it repaired and use it as Angron had moved on to other weapons. Kharn would earn the name the Betrayer, Kharn the Betrayer, at the Battle of Scalathrax against the Emperor's children. After a long and hard-fought battle on Scalathrax, the World Eaters needed one final victory in order to claim the planet for Khorne, for glory. Scalathrax had a bitterly cold night time. It was unsurvivable even by the advanced physiology of a space marine with armor. Knowing this, the other World Eaters felt that it was time to seek shelter and resume fighting once day had broken, and take victory then. This was not acceptable for Kharn. Kharn would take a flamer and put fire to the city that they were going to seek shelter in, offering no respite. This ultimately shattered the World Eaters' legion. They would break apart into small war bands, only uniting under leadership when Angron or some other figure would be able to rise up, somewhat similarly to orcs, but otherwise they would operate independently. Kharn would eventually be the World Eater who would lead the Butcher Horde war band. Butcher's nails are still routinely installed upon World Eaters. Horned Berserkers, for example, of other factions don't necessarily have Butcher's nails on, but pretty much all the World Eaters still have the Butcher's nails. I hope you've enjoyed this kind of rundown about the history of the World Eaters, the Butcher's nails, Kharn the Betrayer, Angron, the Red Angel.